Hello everyone, and thanks so much for joining me today. Today we are going to be doing a sewing video, so I'll be sewing two dresses. One dress for Chloe, my toddler, and then a cape dress for myself. So we're just going to go ahead and get started here right away. It's going to be kind of a long video, so we'll just dive right on in. What I'm doing here is I'm starting with Chloe's dress. We are just going to be serging all the shoulders and the side seams of the bodice and the interfacing before we get started sewing. So that's what I'm doing here. The serger just makes for cleaner edges and it keeps your material from fraying. And here we're just taking the facing part and we're going to sew the shoulder seams together. Both sides, I'm going to pin it so I get it in the right place, and then we're going to sew those together. And then we're going to do the same thing with the bodice pieces, front and the back. We're just going to sew them together just at the shoulder seams. And of course the right sides of the fabric are facing together. We're just going to take it over to the ironing board. I'm just going to iron open but all of these seams, all four seams that we made, I'm going to iron them open on the wrong side, and I'm going to flip it over on the right side and just press them down really well just to get them nice and flat. And I'm going to do the same here with the bodice piece. And then I'm going to take the facing and again turn the good sides of the material together and make sure to match up the seams there on the shoulder. Then I'm going to pin all the way around the neck, and then we're going to sew it together. And then to get this to lay flat, I'm going to take my scissors and just cut a slit down to the hem that we just sewed, that seam that we just sewed, and I'm going to do this all the way around the neck, and this just helps it to when we go to iron it down that it lays flat. So this is how it looks once I get it all cut. And then another thing that I like to do is I sewed that seam that we just sewed around the neck. I sew that down onto the facing part, if that makes sense. I'll show you here a little bit what I'm trying to do. And this also just helps to make so that your neck is nice and round, and it's easier to get it shaped right. So basically just keep the back part laid flat against the sewing machine and then curve around as you're sewing. I don't know if that doesn't sound like it makes sense, but So that's how it looks then from the inside. This seam won't be on the inside, so you won't see it from the outside. and then we're just going to take it over to the ironing board and iron it down, first of all from the inside of the dress, and get it nice and ironed down flat. And then we'll flip it over to the right side of the dress and just iron it down from the outside. Now you do not want your iron too hot for the fabric or it will scorch. So now moving on to the sleeves, we're going to do those next, and I'm going to be using these 2 pieces per sleeve. The longer pieces I'm going to be sewing on a gathering stitch on both sides, and then we're going to be sewing it onto that smaller piece. I'll show you that here in a minute. But first of all, we're just going to do the gathering stitch on both sides of this strip of fabric, and then we'll go from there. So this is how it looks, and here I'm just showing you how you can make it easier to gather if you sew a double gathering line. This makes your gathers just look a little bit neater. It's easier to gather this way. It doesn't twist around as much if you do a double gathering stitch, and it just makes your gathers look a little bit neater and nicer. And then you can sew on the inside seam, and then once you have it sewed, you can just pull that other seam out, and it makes it a nice flawless gather, if you will. But for this, being it's not gathered much, I just did the one gathering stitch, and so we're gathering this longer piece and making it fit onto the smaller piece. And then once we got enough gathers in there to make it fit on that piece, then we're just gonna fit in the gathers, make them even, and make them fit onto the smaller piece. Once I have the gathers all fitted onto the smaller piece, I'm just going to pin it down, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew this. And also I'm going to serge that last seam that we made just to keep it from fraying. And this is how this looks. And then what we're going to do, we're going to take it over to the ironing board, and I'm going to iron that seam toward the ungathered side, and then we're going to flip it over and then try to iron that down. As you can see there how I'm holding it, we're going to iron it into one piece. Okay, and then we are going to take the sleeve part, and then we're going to gather the other side of that piece. We had put 2 gathering stitches on this piece, so we're going to gather the other end, make it fit onto the sleeve, and then we'll fill in the gathers and make them even, and then we'll pin it onto the sleeve. And then we'll take the ungathered piece and flip it up, and then use those same pins just to pin it up onto the sleeve, if that makes sense. And there you have it. So I'm going to sew these 2 pieces together, and then that's going to make our sleeve bottom. So there is our one sleeve, and I'm going to do the other sleeve exactly the same way, and I also serged the ends there So there's our 2 sleeves all done. So those are done, and now we can sew them onto the dress. First of all, I'm just going to get the center of the sleeve by cutting just a little bit of a slit there on the top, so I know where the center is. That'll help me get the sleeve onto the dress. And then I'm just going to get those 2 shoulder seams to line up, and I'm going to pin it and then pin the facing to the bodice of the dress before I start pinning the sleeve onto the sleeve hole. And just to make this fit in better, I'm going to sew a gathering stitch on the rounded end of the sleeve, and we're not necessarily going to gather it that you can see, but it's just gathering it just slightly so that it fits in nicely. So I'm just pinning it on the top center and then on the end piece, and then I'm just gathering it just slightly so the sleeve fits in right how it's supposed to. Then once I'm done with this side, I'm going to do the other sleeve the exact same way, and then we're going to sew these on. So there's how it looks. It's just a little bit gathered, but not enough that you'll be able to tell once it's sewed on and once you flip it right side out. So there it is, and if you just stretch the seam out a little bit, it kind of takes away the little gathers that are there. So there's the one seam, and then we're going to serge that seam, the raw edges there. So I did go ahead and serge the back center as well, and now we're ready for the skirts. I serged the bottom and the sides of the skirts, the 2 back pieces, and then also the front skirt. So we're going to work on that next. And basically I'm going to take the bodice and find the center there and just pin it with a pin, and then also find the center on the skirt top and pin that. And then again, right sides together, we're just going to find put the 2 pins together and then just pin that there in the center. And then we're just going to stretch this out, pin the end there, and then stretch this out to where it fits in there nicely. And it will be stretched a little bit, but this fabric stretches just a little bit. You can make it fit in there. And then we're just going to sew that waist seam. And also serge it. And now I'm just going to take an iron over that seam a little bit and then flip it over and then iron the front. Turning the seam would go up towards the neck. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing here on the back. Now I wanted to do a little bit of a belt. I was kind of low on fabric, so I'm just going to use one piece and just fold it over on both sides, iron it down really well, and then I'm just going to put a little seam there. Alright, and now for the buttonholes we're going to be working on. I'm just taking a ruler and measuring out the distance between each button that I want, and I just used a pen to just put a little dot. Now I don't advise using a pen, but I didn't have any like fabric pencils or anything, so I just used the pen. I used my buttonhole foot to make the buttonholes, and then you can just use a seam ripper to make the hole then for your button once your buttons are sewed on. And now to place my buttons, I'm just gonna mark it again with a pin there on the other side of the bodice there on the back. I'm just pinning where the buttons need to go to line up with the buttonholes. And then I'm just going to sew on the buttons. And for the buttonholes, if you have a sewing machine, I would just look in your owner's manual on how to sew buttonholes. Every sewing machine does it just a little bit different, it seems like. So yeah, just look in your owner's manual. There should be instructions in there for that. So now we are just sewing down the side seams from the sleeve all the way down the side to the bottom of the dress, and just making sure that all the seams there line up, the belt and everything. Then after that's sewed, we are going to just iron out those side seams and get them nice and ironed down to where they lay flat. And then here, this dress was just a little bit long, so I'm going to sew in a little tuck here towards the end, towards the bottom of the hem, and then I'll add a hem there on the bottom as well. But this just gives me a little bit extra room here. Yeah, as fast as Chloe's growing these days, it just allows a little bit of extra room. If the dress is getting a little short, I can just let this little tuck out, and it gives some extra room to grow in the dress. So there's the little tuck there, and then I also hemmed the bottom of the dress. I'm just ironing down the hems that we had just made, the tuck and the hem. So here's the finished dress for Chloe, and this is a 2-year-old's dress, if you were wondering. Now for my dress, and this bodice is a little bit different. I should have just done the regular one, but this one is actually in 4 pieces, and the reason is I just make all my dresses, I guess for breastfeeding, if you could, yeah, I just make them all that way. And I know I don't have a newborn right now, but I just make all my bodices this way so that if I have a newborn in the future, I don't have to have a whole other wardrobe, but I can just use the dresses that I already have. So that is why I do my bodices this way. I just ironed up that one piece there, as you've seen, and now I'm just piecing these together. I'm pinning them there on the ends. And then I'm taking the 2 side pieces there, right sides together. I'm going to pin these onto that center piece there. And this piece is curved, so I'm just pinning it a little bit on the bottom and then on the top, and then we're just going to fit it in there. And then I'm going to do the same for the other side as well. And then we're just going to sew down those seams, those 2 seams that we made. Alright, and then I just serge those seams that we just made, and now I'm going to iron them I'm going to iron both of these seams outward towards the sleeve part, I guess, or the sleeve hole. And I'm ironing on the back side, and then I'm going to flip it over to the front and just iron it down really well. And so here is the bodice piece. Now this is how the piece would look like regularly if you would just cut it out all together. This is how it would look like, but I just do my bodices different, as I said. And then I'm going to go ahead and on the bodice pieces and the cape pieces, I'm going to serge all the shoulder seams and also the side of the bodice front and back and the cape front and back. Now I'm just pinning together the two cape pieces, the front cape to the back two cape pieces. And then the bodice front piece, I'm taking the two bodice back pieces and just pinning the shoulder seams together before we sew it. And for the bodice shoulder seam, I'm only going to sew the outer half of the shoulder seam for now. I'll show you in a minute here why, but only the outer half, if that makes sense. I'm going to sew that. And then once I have that done, I'm going to take a scissors and again snip down right to the seam, like so. And do it on the other shoulder as well. And then the part that's not sewed, I'm going to flip that over, and then we're going to make a seam on the other side. So this is how it looks once it's done. And then we're just going to iron that open, iron all those seams open that we just made. And flip it over and do the other side as well. And then do the same thing with the cape. Iron the seams open on the wrong side and then flip it over on the right side and iron these seams down as well. And again, be careful and make sure that your iron isn't too hot for the fabric so you don't scorch it. And then we're going to lay this bodice down as we had it with the nice seams on the inside. And then we're going to lay our cape down, good side facing down. And then we're going to pin around the neck, making sure those shoulder seams are lined up. We're going to pin it and then we're going to sew it. So now that it's sewed, again we're going to just cut this seam down to the seam, making sure not to go through the seam, and just to make so it lays a little bit nicer. And then we're going to do the same as we did with Chloe's dress by sewing that seam down onto the bodice piece. And there's the finished look. And this is why I do that seam the way I do it. It's just so that when you look at your neck, when you're wearing the dress, there's a nice seam on the inside, as you can tell there, so there's not that raw edge. And then also on the other side, where your cape is, there's also a nice seam there. So when your cape on that side, it's just a nice finished hem on both sides, I guess. So now we're just going to take the iron and iron the neck, getting it to lay right, and then just iron it on the wrong side, and then we're going to flip it over to the right side and just iron it down really well there as well. And there's our neck. So next we're going to just sew these darts, and when I cut out the dress, I cut little slits here where the dart goes, and then I again use the pen to make a little mark. Again, use a fabric marker, something that washes off for this, but I'm going to do 2 darts here on the cape, and then there's one that's on the back cape, and then also on the back bodice as well. So the way I do this, I just take a pin and poke right on that dot where the top of the pleat goes, and then line up those 2 slits there on the bottom and pin it. On the top, just pin that together right where the tip of the dart goes, so you know where your tip is. Then take that pin out and just pin it down, and that'll kind of give you an idea where your dart is supposed to end up at. And I'm just doing that with all the other darts, and then we're going to sew those. And now they're sewed, and the cape darts I'm going to again iron outward. And then for the back piece, I'm going to do the cape, I'm going to do outward like I did the front. But then for the bodice dart, I'm going to do that inward, just so they're facing different ways, because when I sew this together, those 2 darts are going to be directly on top of each other, and this just makes so it's not a big bulky seam there. It just makes it a little bit more flat. And now on to the cape. We're going to put in the cape hem here, and I just put it over the end of my ironing board and then just pin it on there as it would lay when someone is wearing it, just so it doesn't stretch and stuff. And then we're going to make that hem there in the cape. And I know my seam width is 1/2 inch. Once I sew on the sleeve, it should be 1/2 inch inward. So I'm just going to make sure I have almost 1/2 inch there. I'm going to measure it, and I want it to overlap just a little bit over the sleeve, so almost 1/2 inch, and this usually comes out fine. So now I'm just fitting the cape over the bodice part there, and just pinning a couple times. And then we're going to take those pins out, and then I'm just going to hold it over my hand to check it and just make sure that the seam is where I want it to be. And then we're going to do the other side the same way. And I did serge the back center together serge the cape and the bodice together in the back there. And so now we are just going to get our seam done for the cape. And I'm just measuring from the center of the back there, and just keeping a measurement so I know, so I get the other side of the cape the same. And then we're just ironing up to the first pin there, and then just adjusting up there as we need to. And then I'm going to get the center of the front cape and just put a pin in there so I know where the center is of that. And then I'm going to do the same thing up front here. I'm just going to measure from the center out to where I want the seam to be, and then just iron it up to the first pin. And then I'm just going to iron over that first pin and just kind of hold it as I iron it, and then take out the rest of the pins and kind of holding it, and then just ironing it down really well. And the reason I don't sew all the way out on this shoulder seam on the cape is just so it can open up a little bit there, as you see, and it just makes so it can round, be a little bit round so that it fits the shoulder better, if that makes sense. Alright, and now I serged the end of the seam there, and I cut off some of it as I was serging just to make that hem even there along the cape. And now I'm just pinning it on both sides of the cape, and then we're going to put a hem in. And now that the hem is done, we're going to iron it again on the wrong side, and this is again just to get it to lay flat. The cape kind of has a tendency to buckle, so you want it to lay as flat as you can. So we're going to do on the wrong side, and then we're going to flip it around and iron it on the right side. And this is how it looks once it's all done. The cape is all hemmed and it's good to go. So now we can work on the sleeves, and these are going to be very simple. They're just a little bit long, so I'm going to just put a little tuck in there, kind of like I did on Chloe's skirt, and I'm just measuring up across the entire sleeve and just pinning, and then I'm just going to sew probably like a 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, something like that, and then we're going to iron it. Alright, and now that it's sewed, we're going to flip it on the wrong side, and then I'm going to iron it down, and then flip it over, and then iron on the right side. So I did both sleeves like this. This little slit that I cut in, this is supposed to go on the back, so when I cut out my sleeve, I just cut that in right away so I know what is the back. And so now I'm gonna again just find the center. I forgot to do this when I was cutting out the sleeve, and so I know where my center is, and then we're just gonna fit that in there. First of all, I am going to put another gathering stitch in there like I did the other dress, just so we can gather it just a little bit so that it fits in there a little bit better. Now we're going to find the center, pin that, and then pin the end, and then just gather that until it fits in there right. And then we're going to do the other sleeve the exact same way. So this is how it looks once it's all pinned. So we're going to sew it. Alright, and there is the sleeve all sewn in, so we're just going to serge that raw end there. And then we're also going to, we're just going to sew there on top there, sew that seam onto the bodice just a little bit, and this will be hidden under the cape so you won't see it when you're wearing the dress. And this just makes the sleeve lay a little bit better. Alright, and now we're going to make us some shoulder pads. Now I bought these shoulder pads and you can buy them, they're not that expensive, but I just like to make them out of the fabric that the dress fabric that I'm using. But this is literally all the fabric that I had left after I cut out these two dresses, so this is not going to be enough because you have to cut them out on a fold and they're just not going to fit. But that's okay. I found some white cotton fabric that I think will work just fine, and so we're just going to cut these out. I'm going to fold it, and then we're just going to lay our shoulder pad on top and just cut around that one, and then we're just going to use that, the one that we cut out, we're going to use that kind of as a template to cut out the next one. And then for the inside, I usually just use some batting or something just to give it a little bit of a poof, I guess. And then we're going to use that same template and cut out two of these, again on a fold. And now we're ready to put them together. We're just going to open them up, put that batting in there, and then we're going to pin them shut. And the batting will stick out just a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to serge these ends, these edges here, so it'll take care of that. And just be sure and don't serge over your pins because that could ruin the blade on the serger. Alright, and here they are all done. So they're ready to put on the dress. And this will depend on how your shoulders lay and things. My shoulders tend to bend forward, so I'm going to put most of my shoulder pads toward the back. And I'm just going to pin there where I need the center shoulder seam to be. I'm going to pin it on both of them so I just know where they go. And then I'm going to pin them on and as you can see there, most of it is going toward the back, and this just makes so that the shoulder up top lays a little bit better and the cape doesn't buckle as much if you have these shoulder pads in. And I'm just going to pin all the way around, and then to finish it off with, I'm just going to hand stitch all the way around the shoulder pad. And you probably actually could machine stitch this. I just never have, but it probably would actually work. Alright, and now we're going to move on to the skirt. We're just going to find the center of the bodice and the cape and then match those up and pin the bodice to the cape. And then again, find the center of the cape, just pin that, and then we're going to line that up with center on the top part. Again, right sides together. And then we're just going to pin the ends there. And this will have a pleat in there, and I'm going to put that around the edge of my cape, somewhere around there, and just make sure it's at the same spot on both sides. And then once we get the front skirt sewed on, we're going to do the same thing to the back skirts. Alright, and now I wanted to do this belt for my dress, and I'm just going to serge down the one end there that isn't the selvage end, and then I'm going to iron them down on both sides, and then we're going to put in a gathering stitch here just in a second. So here I'm just adding a gathering stitch on both ends, kind of like I did for Chloe's sleeve. And this I am going to do the double gathering stitch like I had showed you earlier, just to make them look a little bit better, and because they will be out front and center for the belt. So I want these gathers to look a little bit nicer. And so we're just going to start gathering here, and we're going to fit this larger piece onto the waist and make it fit, and then we'll fit in the gathers and make them even, make them fit in even. And then we're going to also gather the other end of this piece here. And so now I've evened it out and spaced out the gathers like they need to be. So I'm just going to take my pins and pin this on. I'm going to pin it on the bottom and the top, because we're going to be sewing through that bottom gathering stitch and then also on the top. And now I'm just going to sew it down, like I said, on the bottom, and then I'm going to sew it down on the top as well. Right, and now we're going to move on to the zipper. So I just usually pin the zipper down really well, and I just use my normal presser foot, but if you're used to using a zipper foot, go ahead. I just never have used that one, but I just pin it down really well and going past the waist just a little bit, and this just helps to get the dress on and off a little bit easier. And then to get the other side, being as we need to line up the belt, I'm just going to put a pin exactly right on the top of the belt and also on the bottom, and then where I stopped sewing on the zipper. And that way we can match it up on the other side of the back bodice where we're sewing it onto and get that lined up really well. So I'm just lining it up on the top to start off with. And then we're going to move down to the belt where we had put those pins in, and on the other side I'm going to use those pins as markers for where I need to pin it on the other side to match up the belt. And then also down on the bottom where I stopped the seam, so that it lines up on the other side as well. And then I'm just going to fit in the rest of the zipper here on the bodice and just pin it down really well before I start sewing. Alright, now we're going to see how well this lines up. I sewed on the zipper on the other side, so we're going to zip it up. The bottom looks pretty good, the bottom of the belt matches up pretty well, and the top does too, so that worked out pretty good. And now we're just going to tack down the top of the zipper. I'm just going to fold it down and zigzag over there on the top. And then also we're going to finish off this middle seam here in the back, just sewing it down all the way down to the hem. And here I'm just sewing down the side seams as well, from the sleeve all the way down to the hem of the dress, just matching up all the seams as I go. And I'm just going to iron open all those seams that we just made. And here we are, all done. So hopefully this gave you some ideas. If you enjoy sewing yourself, I have a lot of fun. I like making matching dresses, me and Chloe. I think it's fun to match every once in a while anyways. And I don't often make these types of dresses for Chloe, basically just for church. What I make more for her, just for every day, I like making t-shirt dresses, and maybe sometime I'll show you how I make those. They're really easy. So thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it was a little bit longer, but if you're still watching, thank you so much. Have a good day. We'll see ya. Bye.